Hello everyone and welcome to this SSANTO tutorial. SSANTO is a freely available online tool that helps you do spatial suitability analysis for any type of spatial planning problem. For more information on what SSANTO can do or to get in touch with us, please visit our website that is listed below this video. My name is Martijn Kuller and I'm the principal developer of SSANTO, and in this video I'll explain to you how to perform spatial suitability analysis in SSANTO, which uses a technique called GIS-MCDA, which stands for Geo-Information Systems Multi-Criteria Decision Analysis. So without any further ado, let's get started. This video is a tutorial on the entire process of performing suitability analysis with SSANTO. SSANTO stands for Spatial Suitability Analysis Tool. If you want to know more about the tool or how to access and open it, I will make a video on these topics as well. But here we're going to learn how to use SSANTO. This video is divided into 6 chapters. The first chapter is on creating a SSANTO project. The second chapter is on creating an objectives hierarchy. The first subchapter of chapter 2 is adding the main objectives of your hierarchy. Then adding a secondary objective, in this case of the categorical type. Adding a secondary objective of the continuous type. Adding a secondary objective of the continuous type but using raster data rather than vector data that was used for the preceding objectives. Adding a secondary objective of the Boolean type. And finally adding a secondary objective of the distance type. Chapter 3 is on finalizing the hierarchy by weighting the objectives and saving the hierarchy. Chapter 4 is on the SSANTO results, how to view and interpret them. Chapter 5 is on saving your results. And finally, Chapter 6 is on editing the project, editing the hierarchy, and on help in SSANTO. To open a project, we can either click Create if we want to create a new project, or Import if we want to open an existing project, or we go here to Project and click Create New or Open Project. I'm just going to create New Project here, and a window will pop up where you have to fill out some basic data about your project, so the project name. I'm just going to call it Tutorial, lead project author, then a description of your project, and an email address. Here you can set the granularity or the resolution of your analysis. So this will set the output resolution of your maps. I'm just going to leave it at 50 as it is right now. And then you can press here to upload the outline of your case study area. Now if I press upload, a Windows Explorer window will open. You cannot see it in this video, but it's just a general Windows Explorer window. So you navigate to the outline of your case study area, which should be a shapefile. And you have to select all 4 files that are associated to a shapefile. So it's a .dbf, a .prj, a .shp, and a .shx file. So you select all of them at the same time and click Open. And that will upload your study outline here, and it will create a map where you can see your case study outline. So you can just zoom in to see if everything looks fine, and if it does, you just click Create Project. Now that you've set up your project, you arrive at the main view window. That looks like a map like Google Maps. You can interact with it, zoom in and zoom out. You can see your case study area here. And then there's several steps that you have to take in order to do the suitability analysis. So the first step will be to start your objectives hierarchy. So in order to create your objectives hierarchy, you click Open Objectives Hierarchy View. This brings us to the objectives hierarchy view. Now this view is currently empty because we have no objectives hierarchy yet. So there's 2 things that we can do. We can either upload an existing objectives hierarchy here, or we can create our own one, which is what we'll do here. Let's say we are looking at the implementation of rain gardens, a specific type of blue-green infrastructure in our city. So the first thing we have to do is we have to create our main objectives. Now we're going to create an objective hierarchy that is flat, that just has two main objectives, each main objective having two sub-objectives. So we're going to start with adding the first main objective. To add our main objectives, we're going to click Add Main Objective. We're going to have objectives related to opportunities and needs. So we're going to select first the objectives related to opportunity, and we're just going to call this main objective opportunity. We'll just click Save, and that creates a first main objective. Then we're going to create another one. This one is related to needs. We're going to edit the name again, and we're just going to call it needs and save again. So now we can add our secondary objectives. To do this, we just click on Add Secondary Objective. And here we have created our secondary objective. Now the first secondary objective we're going to look at in the opportunity main objective is the objective of land use. Let's say that we want to put or favor certain land uses over others when we put our rain garden. So again, we're going to edit the name of this sub-objective and we're going to call it land use. Click Save. And then we have to add an attribute in order to measure or upload the data to measure land use. So we add attribute, and in this case, land use is going to be a shape file. And we have two options when we add an attribute. We have data attribute and we have distance attribute. So data attribute just uses the data directly, whereas a distance attribute uses the distance to certain features in your data to calculate the suitability. So we're just going to add a data attribute in this case. And the first thing we want to do is to upload the data. So we click Upload, and this opens up Windows Explorer again, which you cannot see, but I'm just going to navigate to the data for land use on my computer, and I'm going to open that data. Now, it is important to know that your data can be either in the shape of your case study outline, or it can have another shape, doesn't matter, as long as the case study outline is covered by the data, and then SSANTO will automatically cut the data out. So I've just uploaded my data. And note again, you have to select all 4 files related to shapefile in order to upload the data. Now, because I have selected an area that covers the entire of Montreal in this case, and not just my case study area of Verdun, this is going to take a while because it's a large file, and you can see the wheel turning here. So depending on how large your data is, this can take a few seconds or even minutes. All right, so my data has been uploaded. Then I have to fill out a name for this attribute. So I'm just going to call it land use. And then we have to select the column from the attribute table of your data in which the data is that you want to use. So here you can see all the columns in my attribute table for this data set. And I'm going to select the column called type because that contains the data that I want to use. Now here, the type of data, you have to select either continuous, categorical, or Boolean, depending on what type of data you have. And depending on what the type of data in your data set is, some of these might actually be grayed out. In this case, I'm going to select categorical because it's categorical data on the land use classes. And the land use classes all have a value associated to them, a numerical value. So in the next line here, you can set the default value. So this means this is going to be the value that is used by SSANTO to give to areas that are not covered by your data set. So if the data set doesn't cover your entire case study area, it's going to give the value associated to this particular category in your data. So the categories of my data are listed here, and I can select any of them for as a default value. You can also, if you decide not to use a default value, you can untick this box. So now that I have filled out these things, I can start and inspect my data by clicking on this eye icon. Now, this can take a while depending on how big your data set is again. And you will then be able to see two things. You'll be able to see a heat map of the data distribution, and you will see the data distribution in a histogram. So in my case, the data set is rather big, so this is taking a while. And here it appears. So I can see this map, I can zoom into it, and I can see all the different categories have different colors here, and here's the legend to see which one corresponds to which color. And here is the distribution. So here I can see that the category with the name 750 has 32% of all the area. No, sorry, this is not actually about area, this is about the number of features. 17% of the number of features have are of the category 103, 14% are of the category 104, etc. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea of the distribution of your data. Now, the next thing I have to do is I have to set a value scale. Because we have categorical data here, we're going to have to set a custom value scale. So we click Custom Scale, and here appear all the different categories in our data set. And here we can just drag to set the suitability value that this particular category corresponds with. So I'm just going to set some random values here. I'm going to leave most of them at 50 as a default, but I'm going to set some to other values. And once you're satisfied with the result, you just click Save. And that finishes setting up our first sub-objective. So now we're ready to set up our second sub-objective in the main objective of opportunity. So we're just going to click Add Secondary Objective. And this secondary objective is going to be related to land value. So let's say that for the placement of our rain gardens, we need space and we want this space to be as cheap as possible. So we're going to add an objective called low land value. We're going to save it. And we're going to add an attribute again. Now this attribute, this data set of land value is again a shapefile, and it contains continuous data on the land value. So we're going to add a data attribute again, and we're going to navigate to the data on our computer. And this will start the upload of the data. Now, once my data is loaded, I can give the attribute a name again. I'm going to call it land value. I have to select the column with the data that I'm going to use again. So in my case, the column is called R moyen, which contains the average land price. The type in this case is continuous because prices are continuous data. The default value, I'm going to keep it at 0. And now I am going to have to fill out a function for the value scale. So I want the highest land price to be the least suitable and the lowest land price to be the most suitable. So before I do that, I'm just going to inspect the data to find out what my highest land price is. So I'm going to click on View Attribute. Once the data is loaded, you can inspect it. As you can see, this dataset covered all of Montreal and not just our case study area. We can zoom into our case study area to see what it looks like there. And the distribution is pretty even. And here we can see the histogram again. And in order to properly inspect all of the data, we can click on Auto Scale here. And we can see most of the data is close to value 0. We can also zoom in to a part of the data. Here we can see the distribution a bit better. And we can also see here that the maximum value is a little bit above 300K. So now we can set our value scale using this information. And we're going to create a value scale such that the highest value land is the least suitable and the lowest value land is the most suitable. Once we've set our value scale, we are done with this objective or criterion, and we can move on to the next. The next objective is going to be related to the second main objective, needs. So we're going to add secondary objective. And this sub-objective is going to be related to the imperviousness of the area. So we know we want to implement rain gardens in places that have high impermeability because that's where they're most needed. So we're going to rename this secondary objective into high imperviousness. Click Save. And we're going to add the attribute. So this is going to be a data attribute again, but in this case, it's going to be raster data. So we start with uploading a file, click Upload, and the Windows Explorer will appear again. In this case, we're just going to select a raster file, which is a single file, so we don't have to select 4 files in this case. That was pretty quick. We're going to name this attribute impermeability. And in this case, we don't have to select a column because it's raster data. The type is going to be continuous. And we're going to set the default value at 0. And we're just going to inspect the data. So as you can see here, you have a raster file with impermeability values between 0 and 100%. And if we hover over the file, we can see for each cell the actual impermeability. And we can also see the distribution in a histogram. So we're just going to see the entire space between 0 and 100. It looks all fine. And so we're going to set the value scale. In this case, the higher the impermeability, the higher the suitability to place a rain garden. So we're just going to say y equals x in this case. It's a very simple value scale, the most simple there is. And then we're ready to add our last objective. Actually, let's add 2 more objectives or criteria. First, we're going to add a secondary objective under the main objective needs. Add secondary objective. And this objective is going to be related to the contaminated sites. Let's say we want to place our rain gardens on sites that are contaminated because they can treat the water from these contaminated sites. So we're going to say contaminated sites, or let's say uncontaminated sites for the name of the objective. Press save, and then we're going to add an attribute. It's going to be a data attribute again from a shapefile. So we're going to upload decontaminated sites. And in this case, we're going to use the type Boolean. So either there is a contaminated site or there is no contaminated site, depending on the features in your shapefile. So in this case, the column doesn't matter because we're not going to draw data from the column. We're just going to look at whether or not there is a feature or a polygon in a certain area. So we can choose whatever column we want here. We're going to set the default value at 0, because if there's an absence of a polygon, it means there's no contaminated site. And we don't need to insert a value scale because it's Boolean data. It's either yes or no. Yes will be suitable 100, no will be unsuitable 0. So we're done with filling out this attribute, and we can now inspect the data. Click View Attribute. And here we can just see all the polygons related to the contaminated site for all of Montreal in this case. So this is our case study area here. And we can see that there are some contaminated sites in our case study area. So that's good for our analysis. And that's it for a Boolean attribute. And finally, we're gonna upload an objective that is related to distance to certain features. So the suitability depends on the distance to certain features in your data. So we're going to add secondary objective, and this objective is related to the distance to areas that need irrigation, like sports fields, for example. So we're going to name this objective near irrigation needs. I'm going to save that. And then we're going to add an attribute. So this is just the location of areas with a need for irrigation. And in this case, we're not going to add a data attribute, but we're going to add a distance attribute. So here we have to upload our data, which is going to be data on irrigation needs. And we're going to call the attribute irrigation needs, or let's say areas with irrigation needs. And then here we don't fill out a scale here, but we fill out the minimum and the maximum distance. So the minimum distance and the related suitability. So let's say if we have a distance of 0 meters to this area with irrigation need, the suitability will be 100 because we're very nearby or actually on this area. And let's say if we are a kilometer or 1,000 meters away, then the suitability will reach 0, and there will just be a linear interpolation between 1,000 and 0 meters. So we can inspect the data. And we can actually see there's only one little area here that is identified as having irrigation needs. But that's fine. So that finishes this particular objective. Now that we've finished our objectives hierarchy, so we have 3 objectives under needs, and then we have 2 objectives under opportunity, we have to weight the different objectives to see the relative importance between them. And the weight of the objectives under each main objective, so under opportunity and under needs to add up to 100. So let's say we find land use more important than land value. We can give land use a weight of 70 and land value a weight of 30. And then we go to needs. We have 3 objectives there. Let's say impermeability is our main focus, so we give this a weight of 60, whereas contaminated sites are also important, but less important. We give this a weight of 30, and irrigation needs are not so important, especially considering we only have one area with irrigation needs in the area. So we give this a weight of 10. Now, all the weights add to 100, so all should be fine for our objectives hierarchy. And we can go ahead and save it by pressing save. If everything is indeed okay, you'll get a green light here. If there are problems, like for example, your weights don't add up to 100 and you press save, you'll get an error message here explaining what the problem is. But in our case, it was all good. After saving, what we can do is we can download the objectives hierarchy. So we can save it on our computer and we can share it with other people, or we can use it in the future. So we just simply have to click this button here, download objectives hierarchy. We wait for a moment for the download to finish, and it will save your download in your downloads folder under the name that you've given the project. So you can see here it's got the name tutorial and it's saved to my downloads folder. So after having done that, we can run the project. Running the analysis, we always have to first make sure that our objectives hierarchy is saved, because without a saved objectives hierarchy, we cannot run. So we just click save again, just to make sure that it's been saved, and we click on this button, Run Suitability Analysis. Now, this will open the analysis log, in which you can follow what is happening under the hood. So running, depending on how many objectives you've used and how big the data sets are, can take a while. And in order to know that the program is still running, you can follow the analysis log, and it also gives you information on what exactly it's doing, where in the process it is, and if something goes wrong, an error message will appear. So you know that something went wrong and you can try and fix that. Now, if your run has been successful, like it has been here, automatically your results view will open up and you'll see the results on it. So this is similar to the project view that we had in the beginning. It's a map and you can zoom into it and you'll see that suitability in your case study area is represented with these dots, with these points. So you can hover over them and each point will have a suitability value as a percentage between 0 and 100 that represents the suitability in that particular location. Now, depending on what granularity you set when you set up the project, these points will be closer together or further apart. And of course, the smaller the granularity and the closer the points will be to each other, the longer it takes to run the project. Now we can inspect how the run went. So here we can open the logs and we can just see everything that's happened in the background. And in the end, we can see that it was successful and the completion took 48 seconds in our case. So there's a few more things that we can inspect with this output view. So we can open the display configuration here. And there we can select the needs, the opportunity. These are the main objectives that we've set, so we can toggle between them. So this is the results for our main objective opportunity. So it looks slightly different. And for our main objective needs, looks slightly different again. So we can have these individual results for our main objectives. And another thing we can do is we can simply toggle between day view and night view if we have a preference there. And we can also change what the legend here looks like. So we can change it to whatever color palette we prefer, for example, from purple to green here. So we have full flexibility in that. Other than that, we can also have a look at the objectives hierarchy sunburst. So this will give you some information on how which objectives are in our objectives hierarchy and how they're weighted. So we have two main objectives, as we can see here, needs and opportunity. And the needs main objective has three sub-objectives: high imperviousness, uncontaminated sites, and near irrigation needs. And if you hover over them, you get some information about the weight, about the name, and in which main objective it belongs to. And for our opportunities, we had two sub-objectives, land use and low land value. And so the size of this part of the circle represents the weight, the relative weight that we've given it. This gives us just a little bit more information, visual information, on what our objectives hierarchy looks like. You might want to export some of this information and use it outside of SSANTO to communicate it to our stakeholders, to our manager, or just save this information. So there are different things we can do. First, we can export the map. So the quickest way of exporting a map very quickly is just to push this download plot as a PNG. And it just takes a snapshot of what you're seeing on screen. It downloads it, it saves it automatically into your downloads folder, and you can then inspect it here. And you can see, okay, you just get a picture, like an exact picture of the screen that you had open at that time. Then we can also download the suitability map as any file type we want. So we just click on download suitability map. Here we're going to give it a name. So for example, we can give it the name suitability map needs, because this was the needs map tutorial. And then we can here select the file type. So there's many file types that we can choose from, such as photo file types like PNG and JPEG, but also PDF and TIFF. And if you choose TIFF, this is a file type that you can open in other geographical information system software, such as ArcGIS or QGIS. So for now, we're just gonna select the top one, SVG, and then we just press this download button. This will start the download, and once it's finished, you'll see here that it has downloaded it to your downloads folder. So we can just quickly have a look, and as you can see here, so now it's not a point file anymore, but now it's an actual raster file with the suitability of every single location in your case study. And these raster cells have the cell size that you have specified when you created the project. So in our case, that was 50 times 50 meters. So we're just gonna close this. So this is how to download the suitability map. And you can do this for each of the maps that you can view here. So you can also do the same for the suitability, for the opportunities map, or for the overall suitability map. Furthermore, we can also download the objectives hierarchy. We already saw how we download the actual objectives hierarchy as a SSANTO objectives hierarchy file, so that we can open it in another project, or we can share it with someone else so that they can open it in their project. But we can also just download the visual of the objectives hierarchy, the sunburst, that I showed you before. To do that, we just download plot as PNG here. So this is this little camera button. So we just click it, and it will just automatically start to download and save the image to your downloads folder to share with other people or in your presentation. Finally, you can generate a PDF report that contains all the information that I've shown you so far, neatly together in one document, so you can share that with your manager, with your stakeholders, with your colleagues, or whoever you want to share the results with. To do that, you just go to the left here, generate results report, and a window will open up where you can write some information about the report. So some of it might be pre-filled depending on what you filled out in when you created the project. So the project name is filled out here, tutorial description is there, and here's some other text area to give more information. So I'm just going to write something here. And then here you can choose to include or exclude the main objectives in your hierarchy for the report. So I'm just going to include both. And then you just click Generate Report, which will then start generating your report. And once it's finished, it'll automatically download and appear in your download folder. So let's just click on that and see what we've got. So this is the SSANTO results report with the name here, who has done this analysis, when, the time, and here you start with the objectives hierarchy. So first, the first main objective is opportunity, which had two sub-objectives, land use and low land value. So here you can see what weight we attributed to these different objectives, and here's all the information about the attributes measuring this objective. So the name of the data file, the column that we use to draw the data from, etc., etc. Also, the value scale is written here. The same for the needs for the second main objective. And then when we scroll down, we can see the results. So first we start with the map of the first main objective, opportunity. So you can see the raster map here. And then the second main objective, needs, raster map will appear here. And finally, we get the results of the entire study area. So first we just get a map of the study area. And in our case, the map contained three different shape files, or three different polygons. So this is why our case study area looks like this. And finally, the overall suitability map, we can see it here. So this is the main objectives all combined together. And finally, we have some general statistics about our case study suitability. So we have the max suitability, which in our case was 92. So one of these cells has value, or one or more of these cells have value 92, one of these yellow cells. The minimum suitability, which must be one of these dark cells, is apparently 19. And the average suitability, so on average, our case study area has a suitability of 53. So we get a little bit of an idea of the distribution of suitability in our case study area. So let's go ahead and close this. And that is basically all the information that we can export from SSANTO. There's a few more things I would like to show you. For the first one, let's go back to the objectives hierarchy. So we just click on the objectives hierarchy. That brings us back to the objectives hierarchy view. And we've done the weighting of the different objectives manually by dragging this, this button here. But alternatively, what we can do is we can go to Tools and we can press Weight Objectives on Swing. So this will open another program, a swing elicitation program, where your objectives hierarchy is uploaded to automatically. And you go through a process called swing, which is a more rigorous way to elicit weights from stakeholders that aims to reduce certain biases related to the weight elicitation process, especially direct weighting can be a pretty biased process. So if you want to go ahead and do that, you can just press weight objectives on swing, and once you've done that, you can then import the objectives from swing, from swing, and that'll then automatically change these weights that we've assigned manually here to the objectives. So let's go back to the results view. And another thing that I want to show you is that you can at any time change your project and change your hierarchy. So to change your project, you just click project and you click edit project, and that will bring up the project window again, where you can just change the values that you've input here before and press save. Another thing you can do is you can change the hierarchy. So you go again to the hierarchy view and you can just change whatever you've done here. You can remove certain attributes, you can remove objectives, you can also remove main objectives. Then you just press save again and your new hierarchy is saved, and you can go ahead and run it again. And finally, there is a help function. So as you've seen, by hovering over certain buttons, you already get some information about what they are and what they do. But if you need more help, you can go to this help drop down, and you can get help about SSANTO, about the analysis, and about the results. So for example, if I click on about the analysis, a page will open with information about all the different aspects of the analysis and what they mean and how to use them. And when you're done reading that, you can just go ahead and close it, and you get back to where you were. And that is all. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial and you now know how to use SSANTO. For more information, please visit our website. The link is below the video. I'm always happy to hear back your comments and your experiences, so feel free to get in touch with me or comment below the video. For now, enjoy the rest of your day.